What are my problems with Kung Fu? Hey guys, this is College and Bing. Today I want to talk about, what I think about how Kung Fu is practiced or Chinese martial arts are practiced in the modern day. Now, this video is inspired by a video by scholagladiatoria where he gave reasons why he thinks that the modern human community might be straying off the path, so to speak. I have some similar issues with the Chinese martial arts community, but it's a little bit different, and let's get into that. So the first thing I want to say really quick is that if you are practicing a Chinese martial art or a Kung Fu style and you're not doing the things that I say in this video, you're not wrong. Especially if you're enjoying what you're doing, then you're doing something right, obviously. And my goal going into a martial art, it doesn't matter whether it's like a European or Chinese or any martial art, I'm really interested in the historical context of where these martial arts come from and how the system was applied in its historical context. So when I'm practicing a Chinese martial art, I'm trying to get back to the times when it was actually being used for combat. The things that I say here are not in any particular order, but they're just a few things that I see that I would like to see changed. And one of the big ones, starting off, is sparring. Now, a lot of people have lamented on the fact that Kung Fu practitioners and, Chinese martial arts practitioners in general don't spar very often. And whenever you do find practitioners that spar, sometimes they don't spar to, they don't have enough resistance in their sparring. They're just kind of playing pitter-patter with their hands. And what that means is that whenever you go against someone who really is trying really hard to, beat you up, you're probably not going to be able to adapt to that level of, aggressiveness and stuff, and you'll cave. So the fact is, you have to spar. If you want to claim that your martial art is usable, you have to be sparring with it. Now, this also goes for weapons. And fortunately, things are looking like they're starting to change in the Chinese martial arts world, and more people are wanting to spar with weapons, and that's great. But the main thing is this same rule applies, so sometimes you have to be able to bring up the contact or bring up the aggressiveness, and you can't just, do light touches with like really lightweight weapons that don't simulate an actual sword. You need to have something that weighs a little more, you need to have something that moves a little more like a sword in order to get some real applicability out of your practice. If you had a real sword in your hand, how would you expect to be able to swing it properly if you've never swung a weight like that around? By extension, whenever we're talking about weapons, you also have to practice with real sharp weapons sometimes. And I know this is hard, especially for people that are in China that actually don't really have very available access to sharp swords, which is a really big problem. And I'm afraid that that's something that the mainland practitioners are going to have to struggle with for a long time, is how do you get good at using a sword if you can never actually cut with a sword? There's people who will argue that you can train airsoft to get good at shooting a pistol, and, some people are able to do that. But there's always an adjustment that has to be made, and the fact is, even if you're focusing on perfect edge alignment and all this stuff whenever you're practicing with a blunt sword, you don't have that immediate feedback that you do when you have a sharp. If you have a sharp sword and you're trying to practice your edge alignment, you can quickly see if it's actually on or off just by trying to hit something. If you have a blunt sword, you can focus on edge alignment. You can try to hear a whistling sound when you cut. But the fact is that it's still not as good a diagnosis of your technique as actually just trying to cut something. And that feedback of, is my edge alignment off, pretty bad. So that feedback is something that is vital to learning and growing. I know this is a pretty weapon-focused idea that you need to, train with a sharp sword, but with your fists, I think it's also true. It's unrealistic to expect that you're going to be very good at punching and hitting things if you don't actually practice hitting things. So the last thing that I have as a requirement for how I practice Chinese martial arts is you have to come at things with a degree of historical criticism. And what I mean by criticism is I don't mean like, just critique everything people do. I mean be skeptical about what you hear and what you see and what is actually really historical. Because, newsflash, people are going to say things that aren't true all the time in almost any circumstance. Historical movies, historical, martial arts stories, they're all mostly fabricated. And you have to really be careful about what you choose to believe. What is the evidence for why I believe what I believe? You have to self-question, and you have to look internally and say, why do I think this technique in the form has a certain application. And this also connects to my views on forms. Now, I made a video about forms, and a lot of people weren't too happy about some of the things I said, and I think that some people misconstrued what I was actually trying to say. But the main idea here is a lot of forms, maybe all the forms in contemporary Chinese martial arts that still exist today are connected to religion and opera. And, I don't think that they necessarily come from religion and opera. It's a possibility. We don't know either way for sure. But the fact is that there's a connection there. And denying that connection and the showmanship that's inherent in forms is problematic. And it's, glossing over the fact that it's impossible, in my opinion, it's impossible to actually deconstruct a form and find what the real techniques are if you don't have a deep understanding of the historical context of how that form got to you in the first place. It's also true that I do think forms are useful and I do practice them myself. So I study forms, but I don't just learn the techniques and I don't just listen to what I'm told about forms. I also want to, look things up, back things up with other information that I see. And I know that it's very difficult to do some of that research if you don't have the language background, but I just highly encourage everybody to, have a healthy dose of skepticism going in. And I'm not saying that you want to disrespect the tradition of forms, because I actually think forms were kind of an ingenious way that, illiterate people use to pass down the body of, or the system of techniques that their martial art has. So, it's hard. If you don't read and write, it's hard to pass something down to the next generation. But learning a form is a way to kind of have a mnemonic list of all the techniques that you might do in this particular art. And, that's just a way to compact all these techniques, and you can run through it really quick and say, okay, well, there's those applications that I know. It's not that the form itself is anything like what a fight's supposed to look like, and it's not even that the way it looks is ever how it actually looks in a fight, but it's a way to record those techniques as a list. I think that in general, the overall Kung Fu community still has a lot of growing to do, but I am hopeful because I see a lot more people, willing to spar, willing to try and train with sharp weapons, and, willing to try to dig a little deeper into historical research. And that's just a great thing to see because, in my view, Chinese martial arts are not going to occupy any kind of, respectable stance in the eyes of other martial arts unless we really get our act together and we start really thinking about things critically and we start training more critically. Alright everybody, so that's it for this video. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to stay sharp.